longest time we were talking about obesity as the biggest epidemic. Loneliness is the new epidemic. Loneliness has worse impact on health than something like obesity.
Could you break down intermittent fasting in a quick summary?
I can do something as simple as eating less, and that can give me a whole decade of productive life. Why wouldn't I do that?
What about nutrition?
Start with fiber first. Your good bacteria will get an opportunity to survive if you have a lot of fiber.
Let's talk about exercise. What are the key components to a good exercise, especially in terms of longevity?
When one wants to maximize their muscle function and reduce risk of sarcopenia, then resistance exercise is also important.
The celebrities like Brian Johnson, who's becoming the face of aging in terms of longevity. So I find that's the other category of people which are highly metric driven. This is more in the tech, wearing 10 different watches and monitoring their sleep, their heart rates, and their glucose levels throughout the day.
The constant bombardment of all these metrics can, as you said, make you anxious.
Today's guest is Dr. Pankaj Kapahi, a scientist who spent over 30 years studying human aging and how can we live healthier and longer lives. He's a bit of a rebel. He's been talking about fasting and sugar's effect on the body way before these things were cool. Now with 100 plus publications and leading the charge in California at Kapahi Lab, he's helping us understand how can we not just live longer, but better. And everybody I've come across in my life has been super fascinated by his discussions and his curiosity to understand human aging. In this episode, we break down how eating less can help you live longer, why sugar messes with your body, and how sleep and exercise affect your brain. We also touch on what aging research means for regular people, and what simple things you and I can do today to feel better and possibly even live longer. Let's get into this. So welcome to today's episode of the Inner Scorecard. We have Dr. Pankaj Kapahi, who also happens to be my cousin uncle. We grew up in the same house and I've seen him over the years, getting deeper and deeper into his research and science, and has been a motivation for me growing up. Dr. Pankaj Kapahi currently works at Buck Institute of Research in Bay Area, California. He's been in this field for over 2 decades. He has over 100 publications, 3 patents, and currently heads the Kapahi Lab in Buck Institute. Maybe for people to get to know you a little bit more, like the way I did, could you tell us on where you grew up and how their upbringing from the time in Delhi to coming to Bay Area, how it has been?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I was born in England, but I grew up in India. And we grew up in the same house. And after that, when I was 19, I went to England to do my high school, and undergrad and grad school was all in England. And after that, I think when I was in India, pretty much then I decided I didn't want to go into either being into medicine or engineering. I really wanted to pursue science, basic science as a career. And there weren't quite the same opportunities in England. So that was the reason why I left for England and then in the States. So here, and also early on, I wanted to pick a field which I was interested in. I was more interested in physics and maths earlier on, but the question of why we age sort of started taking a grip on me, and I started thinking more about that, and I thought that would be an interesting problem to address. At that time, this was not a interesting problem or a common thing, and very few people wanted to study that. And also, it was also not considered very, what you'd say, not fashionable. It was, people thought it would be not a good idea to work on longevity. So all that led for me to then to do my postdoc at Caltech with Seymour Benzer, when I realized you could use very simple models like Drosophila flies that only live about 2 months, but you can study aging in a much more in much deeper sense than in other systems, and understand the molecular basis for aging and how for example, I'm very interested in the question how dietary restriction extends lifespan, how when we eat less, you see in animals and mice and flies and worms that they actually live longer. It's been tested in over 30 different species. Paradoxically, eating less, but not to the point where it makes you malnutrition, but eating less will actually extend your lifespan.
Yeah, as a form of experimentation and reading all the intermittent fasting and all the preaching you've been doing about intermittent fasting, this is my 18th hour of fasting right now. So if I run out of gas, this is your problem.
Yeah, but usually we find that you feel more wired when you're fasting. So I think if you do it regularly, you become better at doing it.
So when you say when you were growing up you were interested in science, what does that mean? Like, how did some of the influences around your parents, but were you always reading about science? Was it always exciting? I'm also trying to figure out, because I myself personally have been very interested in science, but I'm also interested in multiple areas of science. It could be physics, biochemistry, biology. For you, how did you pick that one path?
Well, I think it was, like I said, at school, I found science fascinating, and I remember enjoying the reading those books, and nowadays people don't do, it's very interesting to see the curriculum, how it's changed, but we were reading Newtonian physics in 6th grade, right? And that was very exciting. And when I was reading all that, I got more and more into science and maths, less biology then, and biology came later as I learned more about molecular biology, genetics. Then that started becoming much more attractive. And I think, and there was also, I think there's an influence of my dad. He was always very, made me question things and be logical. That I think played a role. And the other thing, he was a doctor, and he said, he would always remind me, we don't know the answers to most of these diseases. We just give medicines because that's the best thing that's out there. But most of the times we know their efficacy is either small or non-existent. And we would have this ongoing debate that sometimes people just want medicine for the sake of just having pills, and it wasn't even if it was clear they don't really help. So that also kind of stayed at the back of my mind, that there's a lot of room for improvement, and I believe that science is our best hope to sort of to help improve our health. Yeah,
it's pretty interesting. And now I think you mentioned on the area of aging not being as hot as it is now. Yeah. There's a few $100 billion being invested just understanding longevity and aging back when you started in the 90s. And I think it was your personal curiosity. It was not a hot field that it was hiring. So how has the field evolved over time since you started back in early 2000s?
Yeah.
And now?
Oh no, I mean, I very clearly remember when I was at England, and I got the top marks in my high school, and the principal called me, and I said, okay, what are you interested in doing next now that you've done well? Where do you want to go to college? And I said, I actually want to study aging, and I kind of laid out this is what I would like to do. And the first thing she told me is, don't say that to the admissions officer. So it just tells you the sort of the atmosphere that was prevailing at that time. And now we are in a situation, especially in the Bay Area, where this is becoming one of the this is now clearly one of the big questions in biomedicine. How can you enhance the health? I mean, we've society has sort of progressed from getting more of a handle on some of the age-related diseases, somewhat, some cancers are we can deal with. I mean, still it remains a big problem. But then now the question is, well, can you, by tackling aging, address many diseases at the same time? And can you maybe slow down the onset of multiple diseases at the same time and enhance health? So that's the shift that slowly people are seeing, that maybe it makes sense. And when I was a teenager, I felt, when I learned about diet restriction, I was like, wow, if I can do something as simple as eating less, and that can give me a whole decade of productive life, extra life and productive life, why wouldn't I do that? So I've always been sort of inspired by that. And I'm someone, as you know, loves to eat, and would, if I didn't know this, I would definitely be overeating and would gain weight. So that has kept me like, well, you get both short-term and long-term benefits of eating well. In the short term, your memory improves, your motivation to exercise and do things is better. You have less of a brain fog. So I think there are lots of reasons to sort of think about this, and inculcate in your lifestyle. And what is sad is, despite all this knowledge, so this is the sad truth, so despite this knowledge, the world is going in the direction of being overweight each year, right? So we have, and just in the United States, 2/3 of the world are, or 2/3 of the population is overweight, and we are reaching a point around many of the developed countries. We have 30-40% clinically obese people. So these numbers are alarming, and it's because we are hardwired to be addicted to food. It was nature's way to sort of, it's an insurance policy. You don't know where the next meal is going to be from, so you should eat a little more, right? But in this current atmosphere, we have access to food. We know the food is in the fridge, but our brain can't process that, so it tends to overeat, and that's why you shouldn't overfeed animals in a zoo, right? Because most animals, if they're just allowed to eat as much as they want, they'll eat more.
Nature always has a way to balance it out, and abundance was never an option for most of the animals. And whenever there was something in abundance, that person or that animal would die off and would not leave that trait. So are you saying that like, maybe just take a step back, like, on explaining between longevity, like lifespan, and health span?
Yeah.
Are those two very different? Is the goal changing also towards increasing the health span versus just the numeric value of, like, an average person can live X amount of years?
Right. No, this is a great question. I think it's now, as people are thinking more of longevity, this is becoming something we ask more and more. So let me just break it down, what it means. So lifespan would be, as you said, just the number of how long you would live. But of course, we kind of inherently know there's no point living long if the quality of life is not there, right? So that comes to the question of health span, which is more the quality of life, and to put quantitatively what it means. Health span can be different things for different people. For example, you might say, I want to optimize my physical activity so that I can be active for late in life. Whereas someone else might say, I really want to optimize my cognitive function late in. I don't mind if I'm not as mobile, but I want mentally to be totally there. So health span would be aging of different systems in the body, right? Kidney, heart, cognitive function, physical decline. So there are different. The three most important ones that people go to the doctor for are visual decline, physical decline, and interestingly, urinary incontinence. These are things that bother us the most. So health span, the idea behind health span is we should also be thinking about these. And what we're realizing in our lab is they can be uncoupled, which means that someone can have, for example, high ability to move or physical activity with age, but they may not necessarily live as long. So, as you know, like tortoises live long and they're not very active animals, right? So sometimes there can be trade-offs, and sometimes the two go together. People who are active can also do better in terms of the lifespan. But the point is, it's not a one-to-one relationship, and it might be different between people. One of the things which we're appreciating more now, there's no one size fits all. There are going to be different things that everyone's genetic, the DNA is different. So we need different interventions, maybe working better for one person than the other. And so one has to think more in what we call precision medicine, sort of a more individualized approach for everyone for optimizing their health. So this is, I think, there's a realization that I think more and more people are seeing this as being an important step. And the other side of thing is, well, what if we just push lifespan? Maybe we can help in improving and slowing down multiple age-related diseases. And there's some truth to that as well. So I think both things are there. Yeah.
So it might seem like a very trivial question. Like anything that is alive will die. It's one of the most first principles that you learn as a kid, like everything has to die. So there's a question of, could you explain like a little bit deeper, like what does it mean for, what is the like biochemistry, what is the happening when we say something is dying? So that's some element where I think the science is different from what normal people would imagine, just longevity. You can't just increase life by not understanding what causes it to deteriorate over time. Mm-hmm. And also, could you then explain on like how have been the humans average lifespan increasing over the years? So maybe that comes back to the point of like, what is the interventions helping with? And I think my follow-up question will be more on like which areas you think are helping the most.
Yeah. So I think the definition of aging, a lot of people like to use it. It's been hard to define. And I say one way to look at it is the cell has ability to maintain homeostasis, which means, as things change around in the environment, it can still maintain and do its function normally. This ability to maintain cellular homeostasis decreases with age, and you become more sensitive to stress. For example, recently with the COVID, epidemic, the people who died because of that, there were definitely a lot more older people who died as a result, which tells you that they're more vulnerable to certain things. And that's what we're really trying to understand in the field, that why do you become more vulnerable with age to stresses, and in general that is what's translating to a shorter life and eventually a decline of health. What's interesting is one of the biggest effects on our lifespan and health span was actually hygiene. So the average lifespan before used to be in the 30s and 40s. I mean, of course, some individuals would live long, but average lifespan was in that range, in the 40s. And then with the
and
change
this is
in
like
hygiene,
1500s, 1600s.
right? I think even a few hundred years ago, 200 years ago. And then as hygiene, change in hygiene, our understanding of the importance of infection, that led to the biggest change from in terms of numbers in how our average lifespan has increased. Now, what's interesting is we're not always, now we're seeing an improvement every year. Like I said, because on one hand, we are becoming, we are understanding more. So you'd think that would translate into improved health, but it's not, because we're also, for example, we have more access to food. Our lifestyle is becoming more sedentary. So we're not seeing big improvements anymore, because, and sometimes you're even seeing a decline, because I think our health is not necessarily improving. In fact, now I'd say it remains to be seen how the new generation will do, which is grown on with a lot of screens, because that's a whole other type of addiction that has affected us and made us more sedentary, reduced social connections. So that can have its own impact, which we are already seeing in terms of mental health. It's not been good. How will that impact longevity? It's a big question. So I think these have been the general big trends. And we can get more.
So like the negative things are catching up as well, right? It's not like that is static. Like
right.
In a way, like the science solved infection and the common like polio and these diseases, but there's other things that catch up which were not there 300 years ago.
Exactly, right. The rate of obesity and the rate of diabetes, and diabetes associated with many other decline, say cognitive function, all that was not there, and that's now building up. And now something interesting is happening. For the longest time we were talking about obesity as the biggest epidemic, but now we are there. There's a thought loneliness is the new epidemic. Loneliness has same sort of or worse impact on health than something like overeating.
And it's like there are studies being done on just that part of mental health and
right.
longevity.
Right.
Okay.
So now some of the recent studies on in humans to see what the people who live long, what are the factors that are driving it. It's becoming clear that social connections are probably one of the best predictors in humans. So a lot of the data, I want to say, when I was thinking about studying early, that came from animals. In animals, the best way to extend lifespan would be to eat less. But we are much more complex. And for us, I think the brain, the I guess the brain component is very important. So I think mental health becomes, I think, should be the number one issue when we're talking about optimizing our health, because and the data is showing that, social connection, positivity, these are things. For example, just being a more positive person can give you 7 and a half years of extra life. So just imagine that. Yeah.
And could you talk about what are the main frontiers that when it comes to longevity? And I think the big transition that you've mentioned is initially when you were starting out in the field, longevity was studied as a standalone. And now it's being seen as very highly dependent, interrelated to other diseases, which, there's a lot of investments going in cancer research, in cardiac. Yeah. So it's all related. What are the biggest frontiers you're in the field of aging that people are looking into? We'll talk about the CRISPR-9, that the gene editing. There's one aspect of, I think, that the one that you look into is glycation. There's senescence. Could you describe for a layman, what are the main areas where we are looking into expansion of lifespans of humans?
Yeah, I think this should come in two parts, right? One is more what a lot of the discoveries this is more where the labs are working on these areas, and if there were breakthroughs that could be accessible, then a lot of people would benefit. So stem cell therapy is definitely one where the hope is that with age, if your organs are declining, there might be easy ways to fix that by just replacing the organ. So that can, you can imagine, help a lot of individuals where, the leading cause of death, for example, is heart disease, right? If there were ways to enhance your heart health, you could imagine that could benefit a lot of people.
So replacing the organs, you mean like the transplant, but also just at the cellular level?
Yeah, sometimes you can use stem cells to rejuvenate part of the organism that may be failing. So those kind of technologies. Then, like I said, gene editing is coming in. That would be more, again, that's very experimental, but that would be enhancing whatever functions you have currently. Right now, it's going to be focused on more diseases. Gene editing for diseases makes a lot more sense. If you have a life-threatening disease, gene editing would be a great approach to sort of overcome that. But when we're talking about longevity, for the average person, this might take a long time to sort of to fruition. So I think those are two main areas. The other areas are a lot around discovery, drug-based discovery, or commonly used supplements, which can improve health. So there it can be optimization of, let's say, like food intake is still a big thing. So there's a recent trend on as data is coming on drugs like Ozempic, which have been help people with weight loss, but now there's a growing interest that are they also anti-aging drugs? If dietary restriction, eating less, can extend lifespan, then a drug that can make you eat less, wouldn't that also be beneficial? So that there's evidence building for that maybe they are protective in multiple ways, not just making you lose weight, but they could be also slowing your aging. There might be some side effects to it as well. So I think this is becoming a more intense area of research because this could have immediate impact on many people who take these kind of compounds. I think, and then there's optimization, well, exercise, sleep. I mean, exercise, sleep, nutrition still, I would say, are should never go out of fashion, because even though they may sound boring after a while, it's really incorporating them into your lifestyle. Doing this, having a way to do this regularly, that's key to sort of make that part of your routine. That's the hard part, and that's something. And I think that comes to this. The realization, at least I've had, is that we can't keep on talking about losing weight and improving exercise if your the mindset is not there. So I come back to, I think also the realization that I think mindset might be the number one thing really to optimize, because when you have the mental clarity, when you're better at living in the present, then you have the best chance of sort of improving your health. one thing we joke about is people who live long, if you look around, they're not people who think about longevity and supplements and all. They're busy living. People who do well are ones who are busy living. Yeah. Because I think you can't fool your body, which means you can't take things and live long because if you're a depressed individual, because there are lots of other things for you to really solve. The body, if it's not used, talk about the muscle and the brain, if it's not used, it's going to fall apart. That's what we have learned. And people who are good at using that, they find ways to live long despite problems. So I think there's more need for sort of understanding and research in this area, but I think there is the point of mind over matter, which I think we need to be thinking more, giving as much attention as well.
Yeah, I think there's a group of people who are just kind of frustrated and tired. They don't even want to think about longer life. Like, for example, if some poor family in India, I think to them living longer is like a punishment for some people. That's the hard part.
And that's why I think optimizing mental health is something that gives you benefits on way, because you don't just live long, but you're actually going to have a richer life, more productive life, and you're going to be happier with your life. So like I said, optimize in terms of mindset. The few things that have come up again and again are having strong social connections, social bonds. You can see why that would be beneficial. I mean, one of the things it does, because I'm trying to understand why that is important, and one of the simplest things it does is you have a conversation with someone. I mean, if it's a good conversation, you're in the right environment, it just brings down your stress levels. When you're alone, you're more anxiety prone, you think about things, and your stress actually goes up. So that's becoming more and more clear. And that's why I said loneliness is becoming the new epidemic. Then positivity, like I said, having a more open and positive mindset. This can help you immensely. And then I think overcoming, I guess, having a stronger purpose in life. These are things that can, in this framework, it's easier to optimize for health when mentally you're in the right space.
No, that's super interesting. And what about some like the celebrities like Brian Johnson, like who's becoming the face of aging in terms of longevity? He's like, so I find that's the other category of people which are highly metric driven. They would, and this is more in the tech field where I'm from, they would be wearing 10 different watches and monitoring their sleep, their heart rates, and their glucose levels throughout the day.
Yeah.
And I think that eventually leads to you just being an anxious person.
Right.
And it has more detrimental.
Exactly. So I think anxiety is something very important thing. So I think there can be some benefits. For example, there's some data on like biofeedback. Like having a CGM monitor can actually be beneficial if it helps you make the right choices. So, just knowing, okay, this, just understanding, you sort of work as a scientist. If I do this, my glucose will spike, so I need to be careful. Now, that kind of information can be useful, but the constant bombardment of all these metrics can, as you said, make you anxious. So people have to know where they are. I don't try to measure too many metrics because I want to, it sort of almost makes it harder to live. And so, you want to be more in the moment.
Do you think there's like also a balance here which the body automatically enforces? For example, like a very simple gratification could be having a big pizza tonight, right? It's just so easy. I pay money and it's really tasty in that moment. But I know after an hour, I don't feel so great about it.
Yeah.
Not just psychologically, but even my body's like, I'm slowed down.
Right.
I want to just sit. And it's similar, like, sitting at home, not socializing, watching something on the TV, on your phone. It's in that moment, it seems like a very easy and simple decision that your body wants. But then after even like a few minutes, you start realizing, this is not good.
Right.
So you think that there's some sort of aspect of just listening to your body, and also
exactly
ignorance could be a bliss in some moments.
There's a difference between indulgence and when I was saying being in the moment, and I mean more being in a flow state where you are being more, productive and you are more attentive to, it's almost meditative, right? Versus a state where you're indulgent. And that's not what I'm not talking about the hedonic state, but more at this state of mind where you can make better decisions for yourself.
Yeah, I think like when we were growing up back in Delhi, like, parents would just have this simple advice like, go meet your friends or go play outside, don't sit inside, don't play video games. And I think that has an effect wherein is maybe simply put that you should be going out playing, but I think that effect of organizing, meeting people, and I don't think, like, for example, both of us play a lot of sports. We never have a regret of playing a sport that day. That always feels good. Going to the gym always feels good. Whereas, if you're not doing something that you shouldn't, like you should just spending the whole day watching movie and, just sitting at home, my body automatically tells me that, okay, this is, you can't do this another day. Right. Just do something better. And I think what I also wanted to ask you was, in your, like, what are the main areas of focus for your lab, that is Kapahi lab, and then maybe at Buck Institute level, like where is the most interest being focused on, and why is that compared to the other areas of aging that I think you mentioned? There's multiple areas of effect that we can have to increase longevity. Yeah. Where is Buck investing in it, and where is Kapahi lab mostly focused, and why?
Yeah, I think some of these questions, like I say, could be historical as well. Like my lab has been studying the impact of nutrition and how that helps optimize health. But we're getting more into sleep. But it's sometimes not that easy for a lab or a place to pivot. For example, there's a lot on mental health coming, but it takes a lot of investment to find the right investigators and to be able to ask these kind of questions. So we're one of the areas we are doing a lot on the Buck, like around, like I said, homeostasis, and how simple interventions like exercise, sleep, and nutrition help, but also understanding the molecular basis for why homeostasis declines, and I think there's a fair amount of focus on brain health, because that's the one organ you also think it's not the easiest to replace. So there's a lot on how you improve cognition or prevent the age-related decline in brain health. I think there are a lot of other interesting areas, because for example, nature has done a very fascinating experiment for us in that there are species you can get which have all sorts of different lifespans, and it's important to tap into this kind of resource. But it's a hard question. But these are kind of questions that people in the field are asking, and I think these are interesting questions as well. I think there are many people find new ways to ask these questions, and I think that's the beauty of like leaving this sort of staying open-minded rather than being fixated on certain areas. Some areas they need to progress, and some people need to take that forward. But I think there also needs to be space in the field for new discoveries and new ideas, so that other things can also,
and new connections to other areas. Exactly. Like keep reading on what's happening in other fields, and then I think coming back to what Kapahi Lab is doing, is the primary focus glycation, or is it more than glycation? And could you explain what is glycation?
Yeah, one of the areas in our lab is to understand why is sugar toxic. So one hand we are finding, there's a lot of research showing when you eat less, you live longer, and we know that your metabolism switches, you reprograms. For example, when you're fasting, for example, your body is not using sugar now; it's trying to access the fat and use that. So your mitochondria are working, your fat mobilization is improved, and this is exactly what happens when you're running, right? Because you have to access other sources like fat for energy. So this sort of shift we've found extends lifespan as well. Because if you're constantly using, so we're trying to ask why. So one hand, I identified like how these shifts, metabolic shifts, are important for the brain, important for the body. We think one of the things we have found, which is very fascinating, is the body goes in cycles, which means you have to, during the day, you're eating, you're building stuff, but you have to also break it down, right? So that's catabolism. That has to be efficient for you to live long. For example, the problem with obesity is that your body doesn't now know how to break down fat, and that starts causing problems, right? That starts causing inflammation, causes senescence. So your body needs to stay in rhythm so that it can take in food, but also break it down. So that's one part. And the other part is, well, why is sugar toxic in the first place? Why is it that when we use sugar versus other substances, it's more damaging? Why do we see across species when they use sugar, they live shorter? And one of the thoughts is, well, you live faster. Cancer cells also use sugar because they want to grow faster. It's a way to essentially grow faster. It's a fast fuel, a more efficient fuel to do things fast, but it doesn't have long-term benefits. So one of the things we're studying is that it's not sugar itself that is damaging, but the byproducts of sugar metabolism, and we're trying to identify those, and that's glycation. So it's the same thing you see when you, for example, you cook, and let's say you're making bread or you're making toast. The sugars and the amino acids react and form that brown stuff, which we find very tasty. So we're finding that is also happening in your body slowly. You're slowly toasting away. So are there ways to slow that down? So one way to do it is by just eating less sugar. But the other ways, we're now trying to find ways and see if there are commonly used supplements or drugs that can be taken to slow that down, that process. Yeah.
What do you think about the recent the bio-life sciences, the cloning, or?
Oh. Well, I think there are bigger problems we have to solve, but scientifically, it's an interesting, this whole Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah.
And that has come to life, really. That you can do what was theoretical can be done, that if there are some species that are extinct, you can get their DNA and try to recreate them.
Is there some parallel to artificial intelligence? For example, the reason why AI has advanced so much is because we got so much compute. The science behind AI has not really changed. This was already known in 90s. Now the networks have grown bigger. What has changed for CRISPR? Is it because of the intervention by technology, or is it like the theoretical science has also advanced? No, we could do this.
No. Ability to mutate more genes to make the manipulations to be able to test them out.
And is there a lot of, for example, in AI, there's a big field emerging which is responsible AI.
Yeah.
What is happening? And I think there was some cases.
So this is same in genome editing. There's a big question now. What is ethical and what is not ethical? Because like some cases, people want, for example, this is very much covered in that movie Gattaca. Would you make mutations that would, for example, enhance your intelligence? Is that the right thing to do or not? Diseases to some degree, or diseases we understand, right? That okay, if you have a life-threatening disease, it makes sense to edit that. But I think a lot of the other ones it still remain ethical questions whether it's good to get an advantage using that kind of thing, and what are the potential downsides of that? Because with each genetic change come potential trade-offs, right? And then we don't know that.
That's it's the unknowns, right? The trade-offs are not known, but what you're doing exactly for something, but you don't know what repercussions or consequences it might have. And okay, now coming to the point of for general population, what I have seen, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, all the advances that happens in biofield, like in biochemistry or biomedicine, they have a long translation time to really impact the average population. First of all, I think that is kind of well understood in US, and that's why a lot of scientists would lead companies and like yourself. What are the key aspects from your research or generally in the field which we know maybe we don't have the exact answer yet, like how much it benefits or what interventions are, how useful they are, but what can they take away? What can the general population do as of today? And this is heading in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some things that can be taken right away, right? Like interventions that enhance health through exercise, ways to exercise, improvement of your sleep, improvement of having better nutrition. These are things that someone can incorporate next day, right? And then now a lot of the lab also works on different kinds of supplements or compounds that are safe. They're generally regarded as safe GRAS compounds, and we are finding again and again in our lab screens that they have potentially a lot of benefit, and some of those interventions can be very simple and safe. And why not also take a look at them? So we've based on research to reduce glycation, we have created a product we call Glylo for glycation lowering, and that we are seeing like improvements in mice in terms of extending lifespan, improvement in heart, aging of the eye. So we're and also reducing the risk of dementia. So we're seeing multiple improvements with that, and we think, and that's available for commercially for use. It's sold on Amazon. Another one I was involved in earlier in my postdoc was inhibition of the mTOR pathway, which it's an anti-cancer drug essentially. The drug inhibits essentially the you would call the mTOR pathway, which is important in cell growth. And the idea was nutrients are tied with cell growth. So if you can inhibit this pathway, maybe you mimic some of the effects of dietary restriction. And that's what a lot of us have seen now. So we started this in flies, but it's now shown in worms, it's shown in mice, and there are clinical trials taking place in humans because the drug candidate has already been approved as an anti-cancer therapeutic. So this is it's called rapamycin. A number of people take it because you can get their potential Healthspan benefits from this. So yeah.
So if we break down, I think initially you said the general intervention. So let's talk about exercise. What I recently learned is cardio is good, but then it needs to be combined with weight training. And could you give us some examples of good exercise? And you're in incredible shape. I think for a 55-year-old, you can outrun me, I believe. So what are the key components to a good exercise over maybe not just one workout, but maybe like, let's say 1 year, 2 year period where you can see the most difference, especially in terms of longevity?
Yeah. I'm not an exercise specialist, so I think maybe there are a lot of other people who answer this better. But what I do, I think endurance exercise, I think, is important for heart function, and also we think more correlated with lifespan. But when one wants to maximize their muscle function and reduce risk of sarcopenia, then weight resistance exercise is also important. So I'm not sure if there is a one size fits all. Maybe different people need different things, and different people have different genetics. So I prefer endurance exercise, but I notice a lot of improvement when I do resistance exercise. So one should see what works for it works for you individually. But as you're getting older, I'm finding stretching is even more important now to be so that your daily activity remains good. So stretching and flexibility, those are 4 types that are very important. I think depending on your age and where you are, I think one needs to think of all 4 of them. Yeah.
Do you have something specific for, like, you can imagine the lifestyle of women in India or northern part of India? Is there some advice you could have there? Because yoga could be a great, introduction to like stretch, like flexibility, and also I think it's kind of endurance because the sessions could be longer. And
yeah, I mean, I think yoga coupled with walking, and also I think I believe some of the forms of exercise I like are, for example, dancing has also been shown to be very good. And the reason is, I think some exercise, like I like to play more sports than being in the gym, because I think you're getting when you play sports, I think you're being outdoor. Secondly, you are not only doing the endurance, but you're having fun while doing it. And thirdly, there's a social connection. So I think doing forms of exercise which involve others, you're just imagine in the gym, if you're running on a treadmill, you simply have to pay attention to a few things. But when you're running and let's say you're playing a racket sport. For example, racket sports been shown to be correlated with longer lifespan now. You're making a lot of decisions. So you're engaged in so many different ways. And just imagine you're probably making 10 times more calculations while you're running and doing something together. And that kind of thing can be very good for for example, the prefrontal cortex, which is important for decision making. So, and you play table tennis, it's the same thing. I mean, that's supposed to be very good for executive function, decision making processes. So I think there are ways to kind of get more out of exercise than simply running and lifting. I think you can get more when you do these other activities like dancing and playing team sports.
And I think one important aspect is to make it long lasting, being consistent.
Sustaining.
That is very hard if you don't like something and you're pushing yourself to go to the gym, maybe for visual purposes, you want to reduce weight. It feels like work. Whereas if a couple of your friends join for the same thing, it is.
Exactly. I think it's very important. And whatever I think you do, having fun is a big part of making things sustainable. And it's not just for exercise, I think for other things as well. In life, when you have fun while you're doing it, you're going to get more out of it, and you're going to be much more creative in doing it.
I think your group of Ultimate Frisbee is the same. Like, these people have been playing the sport at the same field for like 20 years, 30 years,
30
and they
longer.
know each other. And
so it's also a time of bonding, and you share other things as well while you're also playing exercise. And I think it's all part of the something like when you feel it's part of your support system.
Right. What about nutrition? So is there certain aspects, again, you're not an expert maybe on nutrition, but so we spoke about exercise, nutrition, and sleep. I want to break those down. Is there some key takeaways or general directional takeaways that people
I think in nutrition, one of the key things to remember is to try to eat whole food where you can eat whole food. And I think earlier, like in the 1800s, food was limited, right? So we wanted to find ways to increase calories. So you got a lot of refined food as a result of that, white bread, white rice, and all that, right? I think now we are facing a situation where food is abundant and the quality has become more important. So I think I now, when I give people advice, I would say start with fiber first. Because if you have enough fiber in your body, and if you're taking the right amount of fiber, not only is it helping in terms of the micronutrients you get, your gut microbiome, which is your hidden organ that we don't pay attention to, but that feeds off fiber. And your good bacteria will get an opportunity to survive if you have a lot of fiber. So it totally changes your microbiome. So let's start with fiber. And the other thing it does is it helps control glucose spikes. So if you start your food with fiber, then your chances of spiking are essentially reduced. So hydration, very important. I try to start my day with as much water I can drink in the morning. And then I think the next thing would be fiber, and then try to have, like I said, whole foods, which will make sure you're getting fiber and you're getting these things not at high concentration, like not too much free sugars. You will get more in combination, which is better then. And then I think one of the things that's a lot of sort of epidemiology studies are showing, plant-based protein is good. So people who eat legumes and plant-based proteins can live almost 4 years longer. So I think trying to find ways to introduce more legumes or plant-based proteins, that would be another thing, should be a staple in the diet.
And then this combined with fasting, do you have, could you break down intermittent fasting in a quick summary?
Yeah, I think one, intermittent fasting means that essentially you're fasting for a part of the day. And instead of taking your food in, let's say, from the time you wake up to time you go to sleep, you want to reduce this time window, because one of the key things to remember is that every cell in your body is on a cycle. So we're realizing that it's not just light that sort of helps reset this circadian clock, the cycle, but also food plays a major role. So if you wake up and the first thing you do is eat, your liver, your gut, everything has to wake up and they have to start working. Whereas what studies are showing is that if you wait for a couple of hours, then your sugar is better controlled. And the same thing at night. You don't want to eat closer to bedtime at night. So I try to stop eating around 6-7 o'clock. My intermittent fasting window is somewhere between 11 to 7, which is more tends to be practical. Ideally, you can do starting in the morning and finish at 3-4 if that works. But with work, that gets a little complicated. But keeping between, I think, 8 to 10 hours. Some people do one meal a day. Some people can do that, and that's also fine. There's studies showing that even for pets like dogs, it's better to have one meal a day. They do better. Trying to eat at least between a 12-hour window, but preferably between 8 to 10 hours. That's one way to optimize your health, and that gives the body a chance to recover, essentially, because at nighttime the body is going to take a break, and all the damage that took place during the day has to be repaired. So you want to give the body extra time for repair. So I for example, there's some studies, and people argue that the epidemic of sort of diabetes and cancers is potentially related to late night eating, because that puts a very excessive load on the body, because the body is not ready to receive food at that time. It was about to go into rest stage, and now you just flooded it with food. With food comes essentially what we call metabolic damage. It means as you process food, everything is going to, like sugar is going to create damage. Sugar is not always bad. I mean, you need it for survival, but it also creates damaging products. The food will end up creating these things. So if you're not clearing it, it could result, you could imagine, even in mutations, right? And that will cause problems.
And the other point is, like, is intermittent fasting not recommended for certain group of people? Is it a blanket statement that it's good? And is there an optimal hours that, I think when the ketosis starts, is that 12 hours? Is that something people should, like the minimum benefit? I think any amount of fasting would help, but is there an optimal amount?
No, I think if people have certain diseases, and for some people it can be harder. You also need a training for it. So with a lot of things, I think it's good to try something for 3-4 weeks and build to it to see if it really bothers you. Like, for example, you start with 12 hours and then you could go to 11, 10 and see if you can. I tried this with my mom, and she was gradually able to get to 8 to 10 hour window, which was, I think, and she says she feels better, but initially there was a lot of reluctance in trying this. So I think one has to test it individual by individual basis. One of the things we're learning is there's not going to be any one size fits all. So you really have to see how your body responds to something. We all have different genetic makeup, so it is possible that it's not for you. But there may be other ways for you to optimize your health.
So one thing about if it's working for you could be the day-to-day how you're feeling, which is a very important factor. Yeah. Is there any other scans or exams or blood markers people should do maybe once a year? I know that's maybe not so common in India, whereas in here it's recommended to do annual exams. But as a longevity expert, which are the key areas would you look at somebody's health scan and be like, okay, there seems to be a little bit problem, or maybe you're completely fine?
Yeah, I think there's a different way to look at this problem, which is, instead of thinking what I need to do now in terms of scans, another way to look at it is, what are you most likely to die of, right? So think backwards. So think like what in terms of your history, what's happening around you. So for example, so let's say for me, I think a lot about heart disease because not only is it the number one killer, but also I feel in my family there's more risk factors for heart disease. I have high cholesterol, so I am on statins as a result. And I think it's important to then go from that, okay, what are your weak points, likely weak points, and how can you work on those to enhance your health? So that's one way to think about it. Yeah.
And you can, and just before I jump to the next question tell me about sleep. Is there any recommended hours, time of sleep, the red light therapy, like all those kind of things? What which one, according to you or your research, says that is the most prominent, having the most important effect on your day to day and your longevity?
I mean, sleep is must because that's the part, again, like I said, where the body gets an opportunity to restore itself. So good sleep can totally influences the next day. And I think I'd go even further. It influences your decision making. So I think it should be very high on everyone's sort of routine, because that influences your quality of life. So having a sleep routine which involves lights being off early on, less screen time around, less food, no food around that time, I think it sort of helps the body get into that state. Have being slightly cooler, for example, all those are things you need to think of to whatever you can work out for yourself. For some people it's reading. Reading is a great way to also help yourself calm down. That's when the brain is going to have the inhibitory activity which allows it to restore. And if you don't do that, there are multiple problems that lead. A lot of age-related dementias, for example, are accompanied with sleep disturbances.
Right.
Some people, this proceeds way early, and there's what you would call a bidirectional relationship between sleep and neurodegeneration, or you could even say it amplifies. So if you have poor sleep and then you're getting, say, dementia or even symptoms with diabetes, then it can make the sleep worse, and then it amplifies. So you want to break that cycle and finding ways to sort of improve your sleep. Think more about it, like having exercise, what time of the day. For some people, like exercising later helps them sleep better. So I think having some sort of physical activity during the day is also very important for having good sleep. So I think making sure all the steps that we know already, we understand, work would be good to first try now. Then on top of that, you might have some problems. Then I think it's good to maybe think of, go to the doctor and see what other ways you might improve your sleep if needed.
That's very helpful. And I think from a general population perspective, I have benefit that I can just call you up on and ask any question about health. But for most people, what is a good resource that you would say which doesn't need a lot of prerequisite, but good information sources, or some channels on the web that you would say is a good reference to know generally about longevity and life that people could follow? Because it's a hot field. There's so much research happening there, and there's a lot of fluff also on the internet.
So I mean, WebMD is a very good resource, and Wikipedia usually has reasonably curated answers. But I think WebMD is the one which I would say is reviewed better than other places which the average person has access to.
And one thing I've noticed I do a lot with ChatGPT is I ask a lot of health questions. I always ask it to reference what material it's, so it gives me references. Is that also something you would recommend that people, if those who are not well versed with reading science papers and understanding, is it peer reviewed, how well written it is, how big was the study, is it good to use some sort of AI to just feed that in and be like, does this make sense?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think ChatGPT is more based on what it finds on the internet. So if at a certain time there's a prevailing fashion or idea, then it's more likely to pick that up and feed you that. Whereas I think something like WebMD, which is more being curated by doctors, there would be a little more thought into what goes into, and when one is accepted, it goes into it sort of will be part of the literature. Yeah.
And I think my next question is a little bit controversial, but I think we have spoken about it multiple times. And your whole 2 decades of work has been on increasing lifespan, which includes you have to think about death, which you have to think about mortality quite a lot. How has your personal relationship with the concept of death, and it's more philosophical, like how do you understand it? Because as somebody, you're working on it day to day, looking at MICE data, you're looking at flight data, and there's a big label, right? The final label is it alive or is it dead?
Yeah, I think one of the things I realized, when you're young, you think you're invincible, so you don't think about death per se. You, even though you're working on these things or whatever you're doing, and I think you take life differently. One of the philosophies that which has resonated very a lot with me is Stoic philosophy, and one of the things there is to sort of live as if this is your last day, and I find that very helpful, because one of the problems of longevity and is that, let's say you had a unlimited life, right? What will be the downside of that? And one thing which you can see as a problem is then nothing becomes urgent and nothing becomes, in a way you could say, as critical, right? Because you can always postpone it, you can do it later, which might take away something that is very much the essence of life. Maybe ups and downs are part of life, and learning to cope with death is also an important chapter in life. And having lost, people who are close to me, like, I think it gives you a different perspective, that I think, yes, it's important to optimize your health and make the most of what we're given. But I think we have to also think about how to deal with death and how to. So it's, I think, made me think a lot more about this. And like I said, one approach that has been helpful is to think, okay, maybe this will all go away tomorrow. But so focus on what you really want to do, helps you prioritize what you want to do. So it's more important, I think, it's not the length of the life that matters. It's really the quality and what life is made of. That's going to be important at the end of the day. So it's important to focus on that. And I think what is sort of surprising is that when you focus on that, it's sort of you'll also be living. You'll also make the most of your life, and the data would argue, if you use your brain, like I said, if you use your muscle, you're also likely to prolong your life. So people who are very, I'll give an example, for example, of Jane Goodall. She's 91, and somebody asked her, like, how do you feel? And she at 91 is still very active and an active conservationist, and plays a big part in society. And she says, I never thought like that. I just am. So I think it's important to also be just who you are at that age. And it's less important to worry about how you were when you were young and old, but like at this moment, what's the best you can do? Right. And that's what we should be. That's all that's in our control.
That's a very beautiful answer. I think it reminds me of the movie quote from the movie Anand.
Yes.
Zindagi badi nahi, lambi nahi badi honi chahiye. So life should not be long, but you should be larger than life. Your role, I see, has grown to be a leader at Buck Institute. You're no longer like an active researcher. You're actually enabling researchers. How has that transition been, being a leader and you being kind of more responsible? And what is the difference in skill set to be a researcher versus enabling others to research as a leader, as a professor?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I mean, when you start your career, you're more just thinking, how will you do the research and how do you ask the questions? And just like with having kids, you live your life, but you don't know how to really show this to someone else. And I think once you have your group, I think I'm now thinking a lot more of what's the best way to place yourself so that you can make this important discoveries. So what is the process like? And so I think a lot about that and try to create an atmosphere in the lab which is conducive to more discoveries, to open-mindedness, so that everyone can ask questions, so that there is a more curiosity. So for example, one of the things I think, which is another very interesting problem in science, we are expected to find the new thing, right? So we're expected to make the discoveries, but schools don't really teach you how to make a discovery, right? And in life as well, I think you don't. In school, if you think about, the curriculum is based on whether you know the stuff or not, right? So you're constantly being evaluated by knowing or not knowing. No one's evaluating by how well you can ask new questions, or what's your curiosity level like. And I think those are the things that are more important for long-term which is the happiness, right? If you're curious about something, then you'll keep on reading. And I think those that's much more valuable. And in science, also much more important that you're curious, because then you're gonna ask the next question. This is a very famous quote by Einstein. It's like, it's not that he said that he doesn't think he was more intelligent than the average person. I think he was not exceptionally bright or anything, and he sort of acknowledges, he says, but I was always more curious. And I think it's the curiosity that led him to ask more and more. And I think it's a trait that we don't, like I said, give that much value to. But I think more and more, especially in this world with AI, this is going to become more and more important, because the originality is going to still, I think, come from humans. And that's got to be driven by our curiosities.
Processes that you have evolved over iterations that help people be more curious, ask more questions.
One of them is, so one of the things that I'm realizing is, well, you have to take the trade-off. If you're going to be curious, you're going to be less productive, right? It's almost a given, because curiosity might help you find something more interesting one day. It might also make you miss something, in the sense that you may not, it may not lead you to anything, but that's inherent in being curious. You have to take that risk. But what you're trying to do is also say, let's not go for too many short-term goals, the things that what you would call the low-hanging fruit. I tell people to avoid that in the lab, because that's not where the interesting answers are going to be. And also, like, creating an environment where we're saying, no, we should be supporting this curiosity-driven research, not always worrying about what's the end point. And if we already know the end point, the research is almost, that's more what I would say companies do. Right there, you have to create a product, and everything is streamlined. What you're doing in academia is something totally different. You're trying to come up with new ideas and new things, and they take time. So understanding that will take time, that will take resources, that will take patience. I think those are things that help more with curiosity-driven research, and not always being metric-driven. That where's the result of this. I think that's something that comes with trying to follow your curiosity more.
Is that also a lot in academia now? Because in corporate, for example, like Amazon, we are highly indexed on deliver results. Then quarter by quarter, there's a whole drumbeat that everybody goes by. Do you see that happening in academia more, that people are more result oriented? Whereas the biggest, for example, Albert Einstein, Newton, Madame Curie, all of them took 5, 10, 15 years to come up with what they did. How do you balance that between delivery?
Even longer. I think, yeah, I think it's, I think we are, one of the problems of I would say the education system is it teaches you that constant delivery or productivity is good. And I think this is what I mean by creating an atmosphere where you're saying, well, no, that's not the only way to survive. Maybe that is good for certain functions. Yes, if your mail has to be delivered, that has to be delivered on time. We need that. But some things take much longer and a much tortuous path, and it's not what a lot research is all about, finding unexpected things. And if you already know what that is going to be, then it's not likely an interesting question. There is definitely there's an element of an adventure in there. So I think to maximize the chances of these adventures coming to fruition, you have to create an environment where you're open to failures, where you're open to risks, and I think that's not, unfortunately, something that I think is. You're supposed to just get it by osmosis from other people, but it's not something we I'd say consistently apply, or we make it part of the curriculum, like how to ask a question. These are things which need to be taught, I think, more. Yeah.
Is there a certain kind of behavior or characteristics that people growing up have who take a PhD? Because personally, I've always been very nervous about committing for like long time, 1 year or 5 year, to research on a single topic. And you have 20 plus PhDs in your lab. Is there certain characteristics you're looking for in the people who succeed in PhDs in these hyper niche programs? How do you stay focused on one idea for years?
Well, I think it's not as limited as it seems. I mean, in fact, one of the beauties of academia is I can, like in this interview, I can talk about so many subjects because you can follow your curiosity. In fact, you get a lot of freedom in academia. That's the beauty of it. If you were in a corporate job, you really have to do that one thing. You really can't think. Nobody's giving you funding to do something else. But in academia, you really have the freedom to ask questions. Where in a PhD or in a given project, you're asking one thing, but really you are learning constantly. And if you have the approach that this is all learning, then you realize that actually you get better and better at it. And actually, as you get older, it becomes easier and easier to do these things because you've now assimilated a lot of important knowledge. So you start seeing more connections and you can guide others better. But it requires a element of you're right, focus on asking the question, but getting deeper into it. And getting deeper into it is really how you're not really asking the same thing. You're asking it 10 different ways. You're asking how that relates to many other disciplines.
The interview is called Inner Scorecard. What are some of your inner metrics that you're measuring yourself with? We're talking about reverse engineering. So let's say this is your last day. What would you say made up a good life? What are the key components for yourself?
Yeah, I think this is where, like I was saying, this is something it's evolving and I'm thinking, but I think it's more to live by values and the process. Think more about the process than the results. Like I said, curiosity being one, and it's connecting with others, right? I think mentorship and working with others become much more important to me now because I think that's what we leave. So I think these are some of the key things which I think are you realize much more important than the actual results, which depending on the time can vary all the time, and they're not the ones that actually bring the satisfaction.
Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. I hope this left you with a few good questions, perhaps a few laughs, and definitely a reminder to keep following your curiosity wherever it takes you. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a friend, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay true to what matters the most, your inner scorecard. Thank you.